Welcome to Do-It-Yourself House Renovation. Today we're going to show you how to improve the efficiency of this simple laundry room by adding some hooks to the wall, and we'll also improve the appearance by adding some beaded paneling under it. We'll show you step by step from beginning to end through the process. Let's get started. Alright, now we're going to decide how tall we want the beaded paneling board to go. And we decided on 5 feet, so the top of the board will come right here, and then we'll have a 6-inch header on top of it. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to find our studs in the wall. And the way we do that is we've got a light switch here, so we know that there's a stud on either side of the light switch. I already put a nail on here, so I know that the stud goes on this side. And then there's going to be a stud every 16 inches off of that. So your tape measure will usually have a red number on it that indicates where the studs are. So we're going to go every red number, and from there we'll decide where we're going to put the seam of our beaded paneling. So I'll go ahead and mark off the rest of the studs all the way across so we know where to nail and where to seam. Okay, so we need to decide where to put our seams based on where our studs are. So we know that there's a stud right here by this light switch, and our beaded paneling is 4 feet wide. So we're going to make the most of the first sheet, and 4 feet does not fall on a stud, so we'll have to go ahead and cut it right away to 45.5 inches. So the cut end of it is going to be over by the window, so we're going to go ahead and cut 45.5 and put the factory edge right in the center of this stud, and then we'll start our next piece from there. The paneling will just butt right up against the baseboard because the paneling is only about 3/16 thick, so it'll look finished when it's done. And we're going to use a very thin beaded panel, so the paneling will just butt up against the baseboard, and the finished product will look like this. And I'm now going to measure the 5 feet height that we want and cut it off the length of 5 feet for the height. And my cut edge is going to be toward the baseboard, so I'm going to have the factory edge at the top where we're going to put the header on it. And I'm going to measure to 5 feet. I'm going to mark it on this side of the board at exactly 5 feet. And then I'm going to go to the other side of the board and do the same thing and mark it to exactly 5 feet. So the other side, 5 feet. So what we're going to do now is we're going to measure the distance from the edge of the saw blade to the fence of the circular saw. And then we're going to use a straight edge to make our cut. So you go from the edge of the blade to the fence. It is almost exactly 1.5 inches. So I'm then going to take from my marks, I'm going to go 1.5 inches towards the factory edge, and I'm going to make new marks where I can set my straight edge. So once I make my new marks, I'm now going to clamp down a straight edge. In this case, I'm using a 4-foot level in position so that I can run my saw fence right along the straight edge and get a perfect cut for the bottom against the baseboard. Now my saw blade should line up perfectly with the mark that I made on this end and that end down there. Okay, now you're ready to make your cut. So you'll run your saw along the straight edge and do it in a way that doesn't push hard enough on the straight edge and make your cut crooked. So we now have our height of our board cut, and we're going to come down to the other end. Again, we're going to save the factory end for the seam of the next piece of beadboard. And we're going to save the top factory edge for the header on the board. So now we're going to measure our width. And then our width, if you remember, was 44.5. So I'm going to measure out to 44.5, and I'm going to mark it right there at 44.5. Okay, so now we've got a factory edge at the top at 5 feet, and we're going to save our factory edge. That'll be on the left side of the board as you stand it up. And if you remember, our width was 45.5, so we're going to go ahead and measure off the width of the board and mark that. So we're going to mark it right at 45.5. There's the mark. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use a table saw to cut this edge. You can use the same cutting technique we just used, or you can use a table saw. With a table saw, I'm going to cut the small part off on the saw. I'm going to set the fence of the table saw up to the remainder of the board, which is about 2 3/8. So I'm now going to go over to my table saw, and I'm going to set the fence up at 2 3/8. So now I've got the fence set up to 2 3/8 on the cut. I'm going to tighten the fence down, and then I'm going to run my board along here to get the width of the board. So now we're going to put the board in place, and we're going to mark where the window trim starts so that we can cut that out and fit it around the window trim, which is right there. And now we're just going to measure the depth of our window trim. And in your project you may not have window trim that you have to go around, but in this case we do. And now that I've got my board notched for the window trim, before I nail my board down, I'm going to take a utility knife and trim out the excess caulk from this corner so that I have a nice flat surface to mount the board against. That's just going to take a few minutes. Once you get it going, it'll peel right out. Peel it out. Alright, we're now going to tack it up in place with some 1.5 to 2 inch finishing nails, and then we'll check to make sure it's level. Alright, perfect. We'll finish tacking it up. Now got an outlet to go around, so we're going to cut another 5-foot piece of beadboard paneling, and out of the lower corner I'm going to measure to the beginning and end of my outlet, so it's 1 to 3 inches from the edge, and then from the bottom of the board is going to be measure out about 7.5 to 11 inches. Now as you're starting your second board, you'll notice that there's a full bead on one side of the board and there's no bead on the other side of the board. And the first board we put up has a full bead on the side that we're going to butt this up against. So we'll want to make sure that this side is going against the full bead so it doesn't have a double bead. So we're going to measure up 5 feet from the bottom and cut this board. It does work better if you cut the board with the back side up so that you get a cleaner cut on your finished side. And now out of the lower corner, I'm going to mark 1 3 inches from the edge, right there, and then I'm going to mark from the bottom 7.5 and 11 inches. And then I'm going to take a square now and draw in the lines. Then I'm going to drill some pilot holes in each corner. now it's time for the jigsaw to cut the rectangle. Now we're going to put our second piece of paneling in place. And we're going to start to tack it in around on the studs. Now we've just got to cut one more piece to fit in the remaining gap. So we're going to measure our gap. Now we're going to place our last piece in there, and we're going to tack it in place. Now we're going to get a measure of the full distance of the wall to cut our top border. Now I've got a piece of 6-inch wide MDF, and I'm going to measure off the length for the top cap, and it's 102 5/8. And then I'm going to place it on my miter saw and make that cut. And now we're going to place the top trim board on, and then we're going to tack that in, and that's where we're going to put the hooks. And now we'll caulk all our seams and corners, and if the bead is real heavy like this, you may have to wipe it with your finger when you're finished caulking it. And now we're ready for our coat of paint. And then we continue to paint the beaded paneling. And now we're going to measure across and evenly space our 8 hooks. Okay. And this is what it looks like when it's done.